Writing Out Loud, a program designed to explore in-depth interviews with writers to hear that words have voices. Our hostess for today's program is Teresa Miller, Executive Director for the Oklahoma Center for Poets and Writers at OSU Tulsa.
Hello everyone, I'm Teresa Miller and welcome to Writing Out Loud. My very, very special guest today is mega bestseller Sue Monk Kidd. Sue's latest book is The Mermaid Chair. Thanks for being here, Sue.
My pleasure.
I can hardly believe you're here. I've been telling people all week I'm interviewing Sue Monk Kidd and they don't believe me.
Well, here I am.
But here you are. In your early career, you wrote a lot of very traditional Christian pieces that appeared in magazines like Guidepost. When you look back to that time, what, if anything, was missing from your writing?
Well, I think those were the formative years for me. When I look back on it, I was trying to find a way into the writing world, and what presented itself to me first was what I did. And I was also trying to help my family earn a living. We had two little toddlers. My husband was a college teacher. And, you know, I was doing freelance articles, inspirational articles. And I sort of started with Guidepost magazine, which was always laying around my parents' house.
Sure.
And they accepted one of my articles, and I just went on doing it for another 10 years.
In your memoir, The Dance of the Dissident Daughter, you write about a very powerful epiphany you have in a local drugstore. I wonder if you might share a little bit of that moment with us.
That was a kind of crossroads in a way in my life. I wandered into our local drugstore in the little town where we lived in South Carolina, where my daughter had an after-school job. She was only 14. She begged to have this part-time job. But I would go in frequently with the excuse to buy something, just to check on her. And I went in one day, and she was stocking toothpaste on a bottom shelf, kneeling on the floor. And as I was approaching, I saw two men coming along the aisle toward her, and they stopped. And they both looked down at her, and one said to the other, "Now, that's how I like to see a woman, on her knees." And my daughter kept her head down, and they laughed, and I saw her look up, and then she caught my eye, and it was a moment frozen in time for me, really, because I knew that I would have to step up and come to the rescue of my daughter, and it kind of exploded a new journey for me of really asking some serious questions. And of course that experience kind of evolved into this spiritual memoir, The Dance of the Dissident Daughter.
You were in your early 40s when you had this drugstore experience. Certainly you had encountered sexism before that. What about that time and place do you think brought everything into such sharp, clear focus for you?
Well, who knows? I think for many years I was in a traditional religious Protestant experience going along and not really asking those kinds of questions. You call that being unconscious, I think. and that's okay. I mean, we all have these times in our lives when we're not awake, you know, we're just not aware, and then something comes along that precipitates it. Often it is a crisis, or it's a moment of pain or something like that, unfortunately. And that moment was quite searing in its effect on me. For whatever reason, it made an opening in my life, I think, to ask the questions for the first time. You know, I laughingly say I was kind of orthodox, in the Orthodox Christian experience for a long time, but then I became unorthodox in how I experienced it, and it was just time, I suppose.
The memoir is subtitled A Woman's Journey from Christian Tradition to the Sacred Feminine. What kind of feedback did you get from your family, from your minister, when you started writing this book?
Very interesting.
I bet.
To say the
I
least.
bet.
Well, the book is 10 years old this month, actually, and so we've come a long way, you know, in that decade, that span of time. When the book first came out, it precipitated a lot of conversation, a lot of controversy, a lot of people being sort of dumbfounded, I think.
Surprised that you wrote this.
Well, surprised that I wrote it and surprised that anyone wrote it, I think. you know, there was a lot of reflection on feminist theology within theological schools and seminaries, but it wasn't filtering out really into the pew and into kind of common discourse. When I wrote this book, it brought a story of a woman. I mean, I'm not a clergywoman. I'm a woman, a mother, a wife, a writer. But it brought the story, I think, of an ordinary woman out there, and people began to talk about it, and it was provocative for people. It was very challenging, and in some ways it can be disturbing, because any time we ask people to question their notions of the divine and how we relate to that, it can be kind of an interesting experience, you know. But we've come a long way. I mean, now it's almost mainstream.
I have a girlfriend who has a copy of this book. It's dog-eared. She has passages underlined, and she says it's changed her life. Was it as liberating for you to write the book as it was for your fans to read it?
It was a liberating experience to write this book. In fact, my own thought is that I probably could not go on to write fiction until I wrote that book. And I can't even explain why that's true, except that I needed to articulate this story not only for myself, not only for my daughter, but just to put it out there for women and say, here's the truth of my experience. And let that somehow evoke their own stories. We need more stories like this, I think, of people grappling with these kinds of things. So, you know, I think when I look back on it, it was important and maybe necessary for me.
When you talk about the transition to fiction after writing this book, you make a comment in this book that silence has become the drug of choice for many women. I just wondered if the transition to fiction was maybe your way to move towards ending your personal silence.
That's an interesting way to think about it. I do think there are levels of silence in our lives. So much of the silence in my life before I wrote The Dance of the Dissident Daughter was sort of out of ignorance. You know, I was trying to verbalize my own experience, and was to a large extent. I mean, I was writing, but what was missing, and you referred to this earlier, I think what was missing perhaps was this larger vision of the divine that could hold feminine imagery, language, symbol, that was so healing and expansive for women, empowering for women. It validates women and their experience. And most importantly, it validates women's creativity. So I think this brought me to a place inside of my own authority that gave me new voice, you know, really a deeper voice, maybe perhaps one with more power. It gave me access to something inside of myself that I didn't quite have before. So you're probably right that the experience did allow me, you know, to find the truth, a deeper truth to express.
What themes from the memoir carry over into your first novel, The Secret Life of Bees?
You know, a lot of people, readers who've read The Dissident Daughter, and then they read The Secret Life of Bees and The Mermaid Chair, look at me and go, oh, I know where that's coming from.
Almost a thematic sequel.
Yeah. It's true. And I think that my editor was laughing one day because she said she did not edit my nonfiction, she edited my novels, and she said, Sue, I just read The Dance of the Dissident Daughter, and now I get it. You know, I realize that there is an emotional truth that you experience that shows up in both of these novels. And while the novels are not autobiographical in that sense, you think of that, they certainly do reflect a lot of my own spiritual questing and journeying, and The Mermaid Chair definitely explores a woman's spiritual awakening and coming to that place inside I was alluding to that I love to call self-belonging.
Yeah. Narrator, in A Secret Life of Bees. Lily, I love her. She's such an engaging narrator. She's 14 years old, the same age your daughter was when you saw her kneeling in the drugstore. Is that just a coincidence, or is there something very vulnerable and special about the age of 14?
It's probably a coincidence. However, I always hedge because I never know. I tend to write a lot from that unconscious realm, and I mean that in a kind of healthy way of making a portal to the inner life and just letting these images come up. And what came to me was a 14-year-old girl. It's probably got a little meaning to it that I don't quite know. It is such a precious kind of age, you know, a young girl on the cusp of this new realm of adolescence and exploring her young, tender womanhood and learning and open and eager. She's still got a lot of naivete and little girlness about her, and yet she's got one foot in this other world. It's just a great age, you know, to write about.
Oh, well, it is, and you do it beautifully. You capture that sense of being 14 better than any writer I have read in recent years. You mentioned your inner life and developing that. You do a lot of journaling. You explore your dreams. How important have your dreams been to your writing?
I would say fairly important. I do pay attention to all these drama that goes on, you know, when you're asleep, and I write them down. Sometimes I draw on them, you know, the images. Sometimes they are actually instructive to me. I do think that dreams come in the service of our wholeness, that there's some intention there. So that's why I pay attention to them. And sometimes, you know, there's a lot of creative material in there you can draw on. So.
Yeah, I had a dream about having margaritas with Burt Reynolds and Lonnie Anderson
I
down
like
in
it.
Jupiter in Florida, and you know, I can't figure out what I'm going to do with that. I don't. It doesn't have the deep spiritual significance.
Well,
of
you
yours.
never know.
I'm basically shallow. The novel, The Secret Life of Bees, began as a short story that was originally published in the Tulsa-based literary journal Nimrod. You've had a lot of time to reflect on this novel and the impact it's had on your readers. When you think about it now, what do you believe it is about the characters and their circumstances that spoke first to those editors at Nimrod and then to the world at large?
You know, I love that I'm in Oklahoma, and I can go back to that beginning, and I was thinking about that when I was coming today, about the connection between Nimrod and The Secret Life of Bees, because Nimrod really was the first to publish that short story, and kind of, I felt in a way sort of semi-discover me, you know, and I appreciate that a lot, so I love that connection, but I don't know what it is about The Secret Life of Bees that has captured a lot of people's hearts and minds. I love that it has. I have thought about it. I tend to think maybe it has to do with the universals that are in the book. I believe there's a layer of universality there of this young feminine, this young innocent who is in search of the mother, in search of the feminine. I mean, there's a crushing loss of the eternal feminine in our culture, in our lives, and this is what she's questing for. I think it also has to do with that longing for love and forgiveness. There are themes of betrayal and all of these, you know, timeless kinds of themes in the book. But there's also this place, the Pink House, which is real. I thought of it like the Great Lap. It's like a big lap to climb in, and that's what I wanted to give Lily. Dora Welty talked about place as a way of healing the character. You know, a place that, she said, people are cruel, but place soothes the hurt and the pain that people create. I wanted a place like that for my Lily, that she could climb in a lap and be nurtured and mothered and reborn again. And so I created the Pink House for her, which is almost like a maternal container. You know, it became, all of those women became her mothers. And that place was healing for her. It was her great transformation. So there is a something about that place and that nurturing space that I think people like. I've had a lot of women say to me, and men actually, I would love to find that pink house. You know,
you could open a chain of those.
A pink chain of pink houses, probably not. but I suppose it's those kinds of things that tug on the heart. I think that fiction that truly affects us jolts the heart, and maybe the book did jolt the heart.
Were you prepared for the enormous success of this book? It was 100 weeks on the New York Times bestseller list. It's been translated into 20-plus languages.
Absolutely not. I was not at all prepared for that. I mean, what novelist in their right mind is prepared for this kind of thing? I mean, at first novel, my great hope was that people beyond my immediate family would read it. You know. And they had a first printing, I remember this, of 60,000 copies. And I was very concerned that they couldn't sell them all. So you could say I was not well prepared for it. That's what you want. I mean, you write because you want to offer these stories. You want people to read your work. And then it's kind of overwhelming when a lot of them really do.
The new novel, The Mermaid Chair, is also getting wonderful reviews. Were you nervous at all when you were writing that book, thinking, I can't live up to all of the acclaim of the first novel?
I was sort of oblivious for a while. I started writing The Mermaid Chair when The Secret Life of Bees was in hardcover, and it was sort of building a momentum at that point. You know, The Secret Life of Bees kind of exploded in a way, at least that's the way my publisher puts it, when it came out in paperback. And so I was in a period of time when it really hadn't happened yet, and I was writing, and then all of this happened, this, you know, success around the book. And I was in the grocery store one day, and a woman came up and she said, "Oh, I just read your novel, The Secret Life of Bees, and it really is good." And I don't see how you could ever write another one that good. And I remember going home thinking, well, what if I can't? You know, maybe. Yeah. And then it was the first moment that I realized, well, there is pressure here, there is expectation. And I was stymied for probably 2 or 3 weeks. I got a little stymied. So I had to go through that second novel thing. And then I just put it aside. I thought, you know, grown-up writers don't do this. We write what we write, and we don't compare our children. That's very bad form anyway. So I will just write the book that's in me to write and not pay attention to that other. And I mostly was able to do that, I think.
I was hoping I could get you to read a little bit from your prologue for us.
I'm glad to. Yeah, this is my character, Jessie Sullivan. In the middle of my marriage, when I was, above all, Hugh's wife and Dee's mother, one of those unambiguous women with no desire to disturb the universe, I fell in love with a Benedictine monk. It happened during the winter and spring of 1988, though I only now, a year later, ready to speak of it. They say you can bear anything if you can tell a story about it. My name is Jessie Sullivan. I stand at the bow of a ferry looking across Bull's Bay toward Egret Island, a tiny barrier island off the coast of South Carolina, where I grew up. I see it almost a mile out in the water, a small curve of russet and green. The wind is spiked with the smell of my childhood, and the water is ultramarine blue, shining like taffeta. Looking toward the northwest tip of the island, I can't yet see the spire from the monastery church, but I know it's there, pricking the white afternoon. I marvel at how good I was before I met him, how I lived molded to the smallest space possible, my days the size of little beads that passed without passion through my fingers. So few people know what they're capable of. At 42, I'd never done anything that took my own breath, and I suppose now that was part of the problem, my chronic inability to astonish myself.
What a great line, my chronic inability to astonish myself. You have such a great command of the language. Does that come naturally to you?
Well, I work at it very hard. I'm a rewriter. I actually maybe one of the 5 writers in America that likes to rewrite. I don't know, but it's a grueling process, and yet I love the process of polishing and sculpting, and I'll sit with a sentence for a very long time just to play with the language and see what image is evoked from it, what feeling is evoked from it. And so I guess it's just a love for the beauty of language and being willing to kind of stay there with it. That's the way I work.
Jessie's very upfront with us. She's in love with a monk. We know that from the beginning. What other conflicts drive this novel?
Well, the huge motivating factor for me when I was creating Jessie was her longing for herself. I think she's lost at midlife. I mean, there's some classic midlife kinds of things here going on. But ultimately, Jessie needs to cross a certain threshold, I think, that I described earlier when I was talking about the dance of the dissident daughter, and moving toward that place where she has her own solitude of being, her own life. She relates to herself. There's a strange paradox, it seems to me, that when we are in relationship to ourselves, we are on that authentic ground and we're home, that we are able to relate more truly to others. And that's part of the movement that I explore in the book. Now, she has quite a process of getting to this place, but it's a homecoming story. And I always thought of it as Jessie coming home to herself in a way that Lily, in The Secret Life of Bees, came home in a more kind of literal way. Jessie coming home in a more metaphoric way.
What's a mermaid chair?
A mermaid chair is an actual chair that exists in England, and I heard about it from a friend who told me she'd seen a mermaid chair in a church, which captivated my imagination immediately. I got a picture of this, old mysterious chair sitting in a little stark chapel somewhere by the sea, just as it is in Cornwall. And the one I picture in my head is very elaborate. It has carved mermaids on the side. So that chair just immediately called up all these dualities, this whole spectrum of tensions, like the pull to the divine because of the church, and the pull to the sensual life because of the mermaid. I think it was in that juxtaposition, that incredible incongruence of these two things coming together in this chair that I really liked.
You mentioned to me earlier before we were on camera that you're working on a very special project now with your daughter. What can you tell us about it?
Well, I'm writing a spiritual memoir with my 30-year-old daughter, who is a wonderful writer. And we traveled together when she graduated from college, and I turned 50. We took off to Greece together, just the two of us, and we had such a wonderful time of rediscovering one another as women and friends, and on all kinds of levels, that it altered our relationship. And plus, we were both trying to navigate these passages, me into older womanhood and Anne into sort of out of college and finding her way into younger womanhood. And we were talking about that. And plus, we were visiting Black Madonnas in France. And, we continued to travel for years together. And so we decided to write a book about it all, and we're having a good time doing that.
How does the actual writing process work for the two of you?
Well, I'm having to learn how to do that. I've never written a book with anyone, much less my daughter. So we're doing alternating chapters so that we each have our own voice and we each have our own story and the thread of our story. But those threads are going to kind of interweave, and so it'll be one story and two stories.
Are you making some surprising discoveries about each other as you do this writing and exchange these chapters back and forth?
We are. We've had some interesting discussions about, our lives, excuse me, and I have learned things about her that I don't think I would have known if we had not sat down to read. She'll hand me a piece she's written and say, Mother, read this, and tell me what you think, and there's always discovery in it for me. Writing memoir is so much about trying to write about one's inner experience, at least we are, or reflect on one's outer experiences and put them in some context and bring meaning into it. So we're in the throes of trying to do that.
You've written both memoir and fiction. What do you think about the controversy surrounding the Oprah author, James Fry, and what happened with him?
Yeah, I haven't actually read his book, so I can't so much comment on the book. But I kind of understand both sides of this. I have to say I am sympathetic to him. I think he made a crucial mistake by going way too far. But I think his public castigation and humiliation was a little over the top. So while I understand, the need to draw lines, and we have to revere the truth when we're writing nonfiction, absolutely. But I kind of feel badly for him of what he's endured.
I think a lot of writers sympathize with him. We just have a second or two left here. Can you tell us what's next for you in terms of your novels?
Well, I'm working somewhere in the back burner of my head. I have a novel cooking, and it's one that is so embryonic I can't really talk about the idea. My editor isn't aware of it yet even, and very few people are, because I think there's a phase for me when I got the seed of the new idea that I have to sort of protect it and let it grow. So that's where it is. I'm at least a year away from beginning the book. Maybe not quite a year.
Well, I hope we get to have you back on the show and talk about it when it's released.
I hope so too. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kid, for being here. Thank all of you for joining us on Writing Out Loud.